Welcome to a short introduction into foods from genetically modified crops and to some pros and cons related to these GMOs. Let's start with stressing that genetically modified organisms are not at all related to pathogenic bacteria. But what are they then? The first genetically modified organism was approved in 1992 in the US, and it was a tomato, the flavor saver tomato. These tomatoes were modified in order to increase their firmness, thus extending the shelf life. And a few years later, Bt corn, with proteins from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis, was approved. And now the majority of corn in the US has the Bt toxin gene that enables the corn plant to kill its attacker, the larvae of the European corn borer. In this way, the corn suffers less from damage caused by these insects. Other crops have been genetically engineered to be salt-resistant or to withstand herbicides. All these modifications aim at helping the farmer to produce high-quality crops without losses due to insects, salt, water, weeds, or spoilage. There are also genetically modified crops that aim at improvements for the consumer. Golden rice, for example, is able to produce beta-carotene, a precursor of vitamin A, which is absent in normal rice. This may help to prevent shortage of this vitamin. And recently, potatoes have been developed to reduce the amount of the carcinogen acrylamide during frying. So advantages of genetic modification may include longer shelf life or resistance to insects, salt or herbicides, or improved nutritional quality or safety. How are GM crops, plants, genetically modified? That does not look like this picture. No. First, a useful trait is selected, for example, the ability to produce vitamin A or to withstand salt water. The trait is DNA from another plant or microorganism. This new DNA carries the trait and it's combined with a plant cell in the lab. If the combination process is successful, the plant gets the DNA with the new trait. So then, if you see, the green part is the new DNA incorporated in the DNA of the plant cell. This single plant cell is then combined to grow a complete new plant, which hopefully do contain the trait as what intended. Let us look where all of this is applied. According to the ISAAA website, an organization promoting the use of genetically modified crops, 28 countries grew GMO crops in 2014. Most of the countries are in the Americas and in Asia. But not everyone agrees that we should do this. What are the drawbacks? A major concern is the spread of modified genes into the environment. Plants spread pollen via the air and via insects, and this might produce uncontrolled offspring, together when it's combined with neighboring crops and wild plants. Will this affect the wild plants or the genetic diversity in our crops in the long run? Critics insist that we should learn much more about the long-term impact of genetically modified crops on the environment before mass producing them. And they also criticize the increased use of herbicides. Another concern is the toxicity and allergic reactions. Products of newly introduced genes, DNA, may be toxic, or new proteins may cause allergic reactions. That is why every crop needs to be tested before it can be grown. Let's look at the test. The starting point is the comparison of a genetically modified crop with a conventional crop. In databases and lab experiments, scientists compare the difference in the nutritional value, the pesticide residues, they screen for new chemical substances or allergenicity, and then they estimate the possibility that antibiotic resistance is spread. On the basis of differences thus identified, further testing may be needed. A feeding trial, for example, in which half of the animals is fed with conventional feed and the other half receives feed with products of GM crops. Or a clinical trial to see if a new crop will react with sera of the allergic patients. Another disadvantage mentioned is that in the fields of GM crops, This is a monoculture which might become very vulnerable to new diseases. And critics also mention the powerful position of seed companies as a drawback. Are foods derived from GM crops safe? There is very little scientific evidence that they do any harm to the consumer. But the long-term effects are under continuous debate. We can also turn the question around. Can we prove that GM crops are safe? No, we can never prove that something is safe. We can, however, analyze the risk. But do we have sufficient information to analyze the risk? If we always follow the precautionary principle, that is, do not take risk unless you're absolutely sure, there's never going to be any progression. But on the other hand, if we implement new developments without proper evaluation of the risks, unforeseen impact may occur. In Europe and many other countries, GM food needs to be labeled. So if the food itself contains no detectable transgenic material with a strange DNA, like canola oil. In this way, the consumer is informed and can choose. In this video, I hope to have given you a brief introduction into the field of genetically modified organisms in food. And I've tried to highlight some advantages and disadvantages. If you want to know more, have a look at the links provided.